Aloha and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we pull our favorite books down off the shelf, dust them off, and remind ourselves why it is we love them so. My name's Tom Galley, and joining me today we've got Tony Pasculi.
Thank you, Tom.
What are we reading today, Tony?
Today we are reading Confess, Fletch by Gregory McDonald, the second in a series of comic mysteries.
Now this, other than the Chevy Chase movie of the, what was it, late 80s or
something like that,
early 90s, not something I was at all familiar with.
Good. Good because Fletch, the original, the first in the series, one of my favorite books of all time, and absolutely butchered in the Chevy Chase film. So it's one of the reasons
we can agree on that.
It's one of the reasons I didn't pick Fletch is because I didn't want to muddle it in people's minds with the film. But the other reason is that Confess, Fletch, the second book, has the character of Flynn in it, and Flynn is one of my favorite characters of all time.
I can see that.
Yeah. So
well, let's go with the standard question. Why is this your favorite book or a favorite book?
It is, man. Okay, so it's a little bit regressive, I have to say. Written in the 70s. Some of the sexual politics is passé. But it is very, very funny. The dialogue is crisp and smart. Gregory McDonald writes in a style where he doesn't use dialogue tags. He'll just have unattributed dialogue for pages. Mm-hmm. And the voices are so distinct that you can follow it without any trouble at all. And it's very, very, very funny. There's a quote that I have where Flynn, the detective who is questioning Fletch for murder, asks him to confess. Fletch declines, and Flynn says to his assistant, "He's still not confessing, Grover. Take that down. The man's resistance to self-incrimination is absolutely metallic." I love that. Yeah.
There's a lot, particularly the dialogue between Fletch and Flynn,
yes.
is always memorable and enjoyable.
Yeah. And it's a mystery. Mysteries are fun because they have incredible narrative drive. It's something I look for in a book. I'm story obsessed. I like the characters, but I really like a story that knows where it's going and gets there. And I don't want to claim this is the most satisfying mystery. There's a lot of mystery, and it all gets wrapped up very quickly. So I don't know how satisfying.
Very surprisingly, honestly.
Yes, very surprisingly. I think Fletch is more successful in that regard than this one, but this one's more fun, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is a flavor of mystery that annoys me.
Oh, okay.
I like mysteries where I know where the mystery's going, mm-hmm. right? So the a Columbo or a Miss Marple or Poirot, whatever, Sherlock Holmes. At the outset what the problem is, right? Somebody's been murdered, something's been stolen, somebody's disappeared, whatever, and then the book is them trying to solve the mystery, and you're along there with them, and maybe you're the sort of person that picks up on the clues and can beat the detective to the punch, maybe not. But you know what ride you're on.
Yeah.
What I don't like in mysteries is when you don't know what ride you're on, and this is an example of that. He rolls into town, and we don't know why he rolls into town. We don't know what's going on. Ostensibly, he's there to write an article, and that's the only explanation we're ever given. And he immediately, he walks in and there's a corpse in his room, so that kind of messes it up. But, immediately he goes out and he starts he sneakily buys a van and manages to get it repainted without getting it registered. He's doing these things that are clearly motivated towards something, and we don't know what or why. And we don't get that payoff until the next to the last chapter in the book. We find out what he's actually been up to while on the side trying to solve this, or not solve the murder, but to, exonerate himself from the murder.
That's interesting. That's a good point. It kind of subverts the standard mystery trope where, you start with a dead body and then you solve that crime. And he's arranged sort of a house swap. He's living in Italy with his fiance, whose father has been kidnapped and being held for ransom, which is also a side plot, sort of. And so he comes to, it's like in the midst of this, while his fiance's father has been kidnapped, he flies to America to write this article, ostensibly. But we know that's a lie from the get-go. Almost immediately we know that's a lie. But he shows up into the first scene, he shows up and stumbles onto a dead body in this house that he's rented.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, great. So we're going to solve this mystery. And he doesn't. He doesn't care. He ignores the dead body. He's just like, this is an inconvenience.
Well, as it becomes more and more inconvenient, he's kind of compelled to try and get the murder solved just because it's getting in his way, being a murder suspect. Yeah. It doesn't give you, the story doesn't give you any hint of where it's actually going. And so I spend a lot of time wondering at what he's up to and why he's up to it, which, I don't know, I find that unsatisfying. But like I say, it does defy the trope, and maybe I've just not been exposed to enough of these.
I mean, I take your point, and I think that's valid. I didn't find it unsatisfying because he's so clearly up to something that becomes an extra mystery. There's a lot of mystery in this book.
There's a lot of mystery.
Why is he here? Yep. Why is he here? Who killed this person? And who kidnapped his father-in-law? And why doesn't he care? And it turns out all of these things are related, which is fascinating.
Yep, they do all end up being related. Yeah. In some very surprising ways. One thing I did adore about this is the fact that at the end of the day, Fletch had absolutely no clue what was really going on. All of his theories were wrong.
Yeah.
He was completely wrong about who killed her, and he was completely wrong about why she was killed. Mm-hmm. He was completely wrong about his status as being, sneakily in the country for a subversive purpose. Yeah, I found that satisfying. The fact that at the end of the day, when FLynn comes along and says, yeah, we've arrested this art dealer for the murder. And Fletcher's like, no, you've got it wrong. He's like, well, come along and show us why we've got it wrong. But you've got it wrong. Oh, you don't have it wrong. At least he has the good grace to say, do you ever feel stupid, FLynn?
One of the things that's fun for me is that in spite of the fact that Fletch is so very, very wrong throughout, he's not, at the same time, that doesn't detract from his competence at what he is doing.
Yeah.
To me, he has good reasons for believing the things that he does. He takes smart, proactive action, and he's pursuing his agenda with vigor and intelligence. And he just happens to take a lot of missteps because the situation is so very, very confusing.
Yep, and so very different from what he thought or thinks it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? He has been made. From before he ever arrived, he has been made.
Yes, that's
right?
it. Yeah.
This is what he doesn't understand. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So if you go back and you read the book again with this idea in mind that this whole thing is an artificial scenario sort of engineered to trap Fletch, it reads very differently. But I'm
sure
I'm
kind of looking forward to doing that, because one of the things I cherish is a book or a movie that is a completely different experience the second pass through.
Yeah.
Fight Club, I think, is the best movie example of that comes to mind. Or Memento actually is another good one.
Oh, Memento,
But once you've seen the movie and you watch it a second time, you're like, how could I have missed that?
It's so obvious.
So I'm kind of wondering if this is going to fall in that category.
It had actually been long enough since I've read this book that I completely forgot what it was about. So I was still just equally mystified. I was like, wait, I thought, what? But no. Yeah, I didn't see it coming even the third or fourth time I've read this. Yeah.
So one of the things that there are two of the subplots or subplots that I'm not convinced played out in a meaningful way. So this idea of the art collector in Texas. Mm-hmm. Right. Fletch debunks that a third of the way through the book, right? He takes his secret van. He's called the art dealer. The art dealer's told him the Texan is going to fly the painting in overnight and he'll pick it up at the airport. So he goes, he camps out, and he stakes out the guy's house all night long. He knows the guy has never left the house. He knows that no delivery trucks have come to the house. And yet he shows up, he inspects the painting. And yet after that, he keeps talking about this fiction of the Texas art owner. And, in conversations with FLynn, he brings up the fact that there's this other person FLynn should be talking to, this Texan, who he does not exist, or at least he knows does not have the paintings. He knows the paintings aren't in Texas, never traveled from Texas. And yet he keeps bringing this person who has no relevance to anything up in front of FLynn.
Well, Fletch is doing a couple things when he talks to FLynn. He'll throw out every possible suspect just to get FLynn off of his tail. He says, hey, here's someone did, like with the keys. So one of the things they say is that, Fletch is the obvious suspect because he walks into this apartment. There's a dead body. His fingerprints are the only ones in the apartment. His fingerprints are on the murder weapon because he pours himself a drink after he discovers the body. And it turns out the bottle of scotch was the murder weapon. And no one else has a key to this apartment. And then, Fletch, just in the course of being Fletch, discovers like 6 other people who happen to have a key to this apartment. And so he points Flynn at all of them just to get suspicion off of him so he can operate freely. So I think that is part of that. It's just like, hey, talk to this guy, talk to that guy. He doesn't also want Flynn looking at Haran too much. Haran's the dealer that Fletch is dealing with, who he thinks suspects has stolen the paintings that he's looking for. He wants to keep Flynn away from Haran. So, yeah.
There's a fun moment that comes later when, Fletch has purloined the paintings back, and hours later he gets a call from Flynn saying, we're going out to arrest Haran, or we've just arrested this guy, and he sets the phone down and his hand is sweaty. He's like, yes, I have screwed up.
Yeah, oops.
But Flynn, for all his fantastic dialogue, Flynn is a terrible police officer. He's absolutely bad at his job.
Interesting. Why do you say that?
Well, checking to see whether the neighbors has a key to the apartment, missing a hotel key card that was lying on the floor outside the door of the apartment with the murdered. These are some really fundamentally basic. The fact that Fletch is able to come up with leads that the police don't, that's fine.
Yeah.
Right. But the fact that they have missed some whoppingly, cop 099 level things, rudimentary copying.
I don't remember how much this is covered in this book, but it turns out that Flynn is, in fact, not a police officer.
No, you see, they talk about that. And I couldn't decide if, because given the nature of their banter back and forth, I can't decide if it was realistic or not. Mm-hmm. But, he gives the history to Flynn that actually he was, basically a military spy.
Yeah.
And having retired from that, they allowed him to slide into this job. So they just slid him into a inspector's job in the police department, which doesn't sound very realistic to me.
Does not sound plausible at all. That's the continuation. So that turns out to be the backstory that Flynn is actually he starts off as a military spy as a kid.
Yeah, he talks about that in this book a little bit too.
He's
taking photographs and getting signatures, and turns out he's in the Hitler Youth, but he's sending this stuff to a spy in London.
Yeah,
that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. So he continues to do that, and that's actually his job. And he works for an organization that you get into this in later books, where he's still a spy, and his role is so specialized, and this department is so specialized that they only recruit or bring these people up, activate them for very super specialized missions, which doesn't happen very often. So he needs a cover job the rest of the time, and so his agency arranges this position for him. So that's how they have the pull.
I guess that'll. If I stick with the series of knowing that they're going to pay that off. But there was just, that bothered me clearly. The fact that, I liked the fact that he was intelligent. I liked the fact that he didn't jump to the obvious conclusions. And I liked the fact that he had a nickname in the press, which was Reluctant FLynn.
Reluctant FLynn, yeah.
That I thought spoke well. But he was shockingly inept at some basics of what a police detective should be covering.
Yeah, because he doesn't have that basic training.
Yeah.
That's not...
And he acknowledges it,
but
he acknowledges it in sort of a tongue-in-cheek manner. He's like, Grover, it's astonishing how incompetent we are. No, it is actually astonishing how incompetent you are. You didn't think to knock on the neighbor's door and ask if they had a key. Yeah. You didn't think to ask the ex-wife if she had a key. I would have come up with that. I'm just going to put my hand in there and say, I would have come up with that.
And yet he solves the case.
He solves the case of that's so abstract that even Fletch has completely missed it. Yeah.
Yeah, because he's Flynn, his whole thing is that he's a slow and thoughtful guy, that he doesn't want to rush to judgment. That's why he's Reluctant FLynn. His assistant, Grover, who's not Grover. His name is not Grover.
I get the feeling Grover doesn't like him very much. He's a bird's turd. That's the description.
Grover is dismayed at being stuck with this guy who doesn't follow police procedure, who doesn't beat up suspects to get information out of them, who's just not a man's man in any way. and doesn't, doesn't conform to the idea of a Boston police detective in any particular.
We're in agreement on that point.
And that's why, but I think that's part of Flynn's success, is because he's got a very different perspective on things, and he misses some obvious clues, but he also follows some non-obvious leads. So
he is a very refreshing character.
Yes, he is. Yeah. Actually, one of my favorite scenes in this book has nothing to do with any of the mysteries. There's so many mysteries going on in this book, all in different directions. And yet one of my favorite scenes has nothing to do with any of that. Fletch goes over to Flynn's house and just for a visit. And you see Flynn with his family. And there's like, okay, we're just in the middle of doing, and it turns out their family, everyone plays a different instrument. And so every night they perform as a quartet or a quintet or whatever. Forget how many of them are. There's a lot. He has a lot of kids.
Three kids and a wife? 4 kids, but one of them was an infant, I think.
It's got to be at least 4. Yeah.
But the piece they were playing that night did not require piano, and the wife played the piano. So, but they're right at the foot of the airport, so they're being periodically interrupted. Well, not interrupted; they don't stop, right? But there's airplanes taking off every so many minutes, coming straight overhead, interrupting the music. Yeah, no, that's a lovely scene.
It's fun, and I like the idea that it's part of why he's such a terrible detective, is because he doesn't care. He goes and he does his job and he plods along and he follows the clues that he sees. He's in no hurry to make an arrest. He cannot be politically pressured because he doesn't care. If he solves the case, great. And if he doesn't, his life is at home. I love
the description of his relationship with the press. Where, there's a murder. He's been appointed to it. The press screams about his incompetence because nothing happens. And then, when nothing still happens, they bemoan the state of the worthlessness of the police department, and then he makes an arrest and it happens all over again. But as, after 7 or 8 repetitions of this thing, the press finally gives up with the screaming for results and with the bemoaning, and they just acknowledge, and they give him the nickname, Reluctant FLynn. But they finally acknowledge, okay, he's going to get to the guy eventually. Not in a timely enough fashion for the press, so they're not excited about it. They can't use it. Well, and I love the fact that he actually knew who murdered the councilwoman and was deliberately not telling the press just to allow time to pass. Yeah, that's right. That's yet another mystery that happens in this book, that Flynn is on 2 cases at the same time. One is the murder in Fletch's apartment, and one is this city councilwoman who gets murdered. So, which actually that's the only one that's not connected, that's not tied into this whole other thing. Now, one thing that I must have just missed, the father-in-law, uncle-in-law, grandfather-in-law? Father-in-law. His fiance's father. Comes back. Yes. And he says, which one stole my paintings? And he said, your daughter. Yes. I don't get a sense of how he made that decision. Now, it turns out, he says it was your daughter. And then after he's dropped that bomb on the guy, he asks him, well, what about the catalogs, right? We've had these catalogs that showed some of your stolen paintings had been sold. And again, the father says, my wife didn't even look at them. But that's not information that Fletch had when he came to the conclusion that it was his fiancée that had done the theft. I think this is the information. I have a quote here. Let me see what the context is. I don't know if I just read over it and it didn't click what the significance was. So Andy, who's his fiancée, had gone to school in the United States. And she went to Radcliffe, and Radcliffe is part of Harvard, and Haran was a professor at Harvard, and she actually knew Haran, the dealer who had the stolen paintings. So I think that's the information he used to draw the conclusion that Haran must have been working with Andy. Okay, so there was no smoking gun. All he found out was that she had been his student, and now he had the paintings in his possession. But so there's a link. There was a leap there. There's an obvious link to Andy, and there isn't that same link to Sylvia. So I did not care for the Sylvia character. No, she was very unpleasant. She was very thoroughly unlikable, and I was really annoyed with the fact that she ended up in bed with Fletch. That is distressing to me. But one of the themes of the Fletch series is that Fletch will sleep with anyone. I did find it so twice in this book. He starts to write a sex scene and then just moves right on.
Yeah.
Which is fine. There was a thing in the 70s in particular where you had to have sex scenes in certain types of action books and mystery books. But, and this, he starts it, and we get like a paragraph or 2 paragraphs of description with a hand here and an arm there and a breast there, and then we're past it.
Yeah. That's refreshing. Sex scenes are boring.
I kind of agree with that.
There's no story happens in sex, although there is a significant sex scene in Fletch. So you've seen the movie, right? And I don't think you've read the book.
It's been so long since I've seen it, but yeah, I did indeed see it.
So one of the mysteries in Fletch is that this guy hires Fletch to kill him. He says, I need you to kill me because I have, terminal cancer and I can't bring myself to do it. And Fletch is like, why would you hire someone to kill you? So he starts investigating the guy. And later, just accidentally, he sleeps with the man's wife. And the man's wife points out to him that you have the same bone structure as my husband. And he goes, aha, maybe that's why he wants me to kill him, so he can kill me and use my body as his and flee the country. So that's a sex scene with a payoff.
That's an important one.
Yeah.
One thing that, as I was reading this book, and again, this is the first Fletch book that I've read.
Yeah.
But I'm reading the book and I'm looking at envisioning the character, and I wonder to myself, who in the world ever thought that Chevy Chase was the person to play this character?
Here's the thought process. Chevy Chase is one of the biggest stars in the world. He's funny. This is a funny book. Chevy Chase. That's as far as
I could see it being that simple, but wow, was there nothing Chevy Chase in that?
Absolutely nothing. And that movie bombed so hard that it pretty much killed his franchise, which makes me very sad. Yeah.
Would be nice to look forward to 11 nice movies made on 11 nice books.
Yeah. In fact, I think as much as this book was unsatisfying for you, I think Fletch would be very satisfying in almost exactly the opposite way. That the mystery is very there. It's very tangible. There's a couple of mysteries. They all tie up very neatly, but with some very, very dogged detective work on Fletch's part. So.
Yeah, I might dive into that. I mean, the way the mystery worked in this one annoyed me, but I really enjoyed the characters. I really enjoyed a lot of aspects to this. Just that when I read a mystery, I'm not one of these people who knocks themselves out trying to beat the detective to the punch.
Yeah.
I am perfectly happy to wait until they do everybody's gathered together and they do the explanation, and then, mentally go back over the clues and go, yes, I can see how that all lines up nicely.
Yeah.
But I didn't even have the option in this one. We have to get to the end of the book to find out what the mystery actually is.
Yeah. We have to. I mean,
I literally think it's the next to the last chapter before we find out what's really going on. It might be the third to the last chapter, but it's well into the book before you get to the reality of why Fletch is there. And then the completely unlooked for bombshell that father-in-law is neither dead nor kidnapped.
Yeah. Yeah, again, just because Fletch is so proactive about what he is doing, I'm willing to suspend my I don't know, whatever I'm suspending there, not disbelief, but need for information, because he's actively doing something. And so it's like, okay, you're doing something interesting, and I know it's going to pay off. So, I just watched Breaking Bad again recently. I forget whether it's Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul. One of those series has long sequences where Mike Ehrmantraut will just start doing something. I think it's actually Better Call Saul. It's like he'll just get a hose and he'll poke a bunch of holes in it and start sawing it into lengths, and just like, what on earth are you doing? And there's no explanation. He's not talking to anybody. He hasn't set up anything in advance. And you just get this 5-minute montage of he's doing something very, very deliberate. And then bam, all of a sudden it pays off. It's like, oh, that's what you were doing.
Yep.
Yeah. So
I know exactly the scene you're talking about there too. Yeah. That didn't bother me at all. Interesting.
Yeah. So I enjoy those. And they're much shorter in Better Call Saul than here, which is, this lasts for almost the extent of the entire novel. And that's usually one or two scenes where they hold you in suspense.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, they did that through the Breaking Bad, because you'd always have an opening image that went with the title music, and then you would never find out what the opening image was until you were almost to the end of the
season
episode.
2, every episode started with the bear in the pool, and you're just like,
and
what?
that didn't get paid off for multiple episodes until the plane crashes.
Yeah, so I'm okay with it as long as it's very deliberate. If it's not deliberate, then I would be frustrated too. I'd be like, what on earth is happening? Yeah.
Well, he's so clearly focused on something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's doing very specific things that, okay, I was right about this. They can't be related to the murder.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The fact that he snuck out to buy a van, and he was very specific about the make, the model, the year, and the color of the van, right? And then he immediately defaces it just so he can get it repainted. And he immediately goes out to find a place to park it that's both close enough that it's accessible, but not likely to be found by anyone else.
Yeah.
Clearly, this stat can't have anything to do with the murder, but we haven't heard about the missing paintings at this point, or only tangentially. So yeah, it was like, what does he need the van for?
Yeah.
And then he never used it. He had this van, and then it didn't go anywhere for 8-9 chapters.
Well, he does use it eventually.
He does use it eventually.
He needs it to transport the paintings.
Yep.
Which you don't know. You don't even know he's looking for the paintings initially.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah.
And again, Mike Ehrmantraut style, he deliberately sabotages. He calls the police to report the break-in, and then he calls the house owner to report a break-in, and he actually breaks in.
I love that.
Just so the police will show up, and the guy will show up, and then they'll leave, and he can really break in.
Yeah.
Which, genius.
That was a nice sequence.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the timing on that, he steals the paintings, and the very next morning he gets a call from Flynn saying, "Hey, we've arrested this guy.
And now we're going to go recover the paintings." Yeah.
And then they do the same thing, right? He sends father-in-law out the door as Flynn has arrived, and he gives him the keys and it's like, "Get out of here." And then when Flynn leaves, he looks out the window only to see the guys just now pulling out with the van. They actually almost hit each other,
Yeah.
And I love, he's not infallible. I liked that about the character. And he worried, there's several moments throughout the book when he was seriously worried about, his status and whatever it was that was going on.
Yeah, he's smart, and he's very good at what he does, which is he's an investigative reporter, and he carries over those skills into this. In fact, he actually does some investigative reporting just in the middle of this book, unrelated to anything else.
Yep.
Which was amusing. But that pays off because he gets to use the newspaper's morgue and research some facts about some people. But yeah, he's very, very good, but he's not infallible. It's grounded. I mean, it is comic. It is light, and there's some improbabilities here, but it is grounded in some kind of reality. He's not any kind of superhero or Sherlock Holmes type genius. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a good read. I definitely enjoyed it.
It's fun. I picked this up. We do two of these a month back to back, and we have our next two books. And this book I read like the next day. It's like, okay, I should save this, but no, I'm just gonna read it right now. Boom, and I was done. Yeah,
it was not a lengthy read. It did go pretty quickly. It just took, worked on it a weekend and it was gone.
Yeah,
but yeah, that was. I am glad to know that as the series continues, Flynn continues, because I love that interaction between the two.
No, Flynn does not continue in this series. Flynn goes off and gets his own series.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, which is sad because I like the interaction between Flynn and Fletch, and I think Flynn is most successful in this book. I mean, his own series, they're interesting, but they're not as good, and they're a little bit weirder and a little bit wilder because it's more leaning on his agency persona. And so they're not as grounded. They're kind of strange. He's still a great character, but this is the book that reveals Flynn's character the best, I think. So, yep.
Well, good. I'm glad you picked this one then, because that was certainly enjoyable.
Well, great. All right. I think that's all I've got on this book.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah. Okay. So,
coming up next, I've been flip-flopping on this for days, but I have settled.
Okay.
Our next book is going to be a Richard Matheson, I Am Legend.
I cannot wait to read that.
Story of the last man on Earth.
Yeah.
All right. We will see you all in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.